workspace is a co-working meeting and gallery space owned by the town of Manchester. We have multiple missions. One is to provide a hospitable, flexible, affordable workspace for people who are growing their businesses, entrepreneurs. We're also trying to offer them support in terms of programming and resources. We have private offices, collective co-working spaces, and 7 meeting venues. This is our largest meeting venue, which is also our largest art gallery of 3 art spaces on site. So that's another mission of ours, is to work with artists to support them, as well as bringing art and culture, more art and culture downtown, because we already have a lot. And then to drive traffic and people downtown. So when people come and have meetings here, we ask them, you know, are you aware of this service provided on Main Street? Or we've got restaurants just like EPOCH Center down here with the international cuisine. And we've got other art places. Harvest Beads is a great place to buy retail. We've got other places like Sweet Pepper in the Manchester Mall. There's many vendors there, including the Manchester Cheesecake Company, and lots of great places to support local artists. This is going to be recorded, so it'll live in infamy. And the program tonight is called A Conversational Roundtable on Perspectives of Home. The art exhibit, we are in an art gallery right now, is exhibiting about over 100 pieces of art and poetry created by more than 40 local artists. And local for us is anything in New England. These are mostly Connecticut artists and many Manchester artists. And we asked them to create pieces that represented home, whatever that is to them. And everybody has a different interpretation of it, and that's what we're here to talk about. In addition, we partnered with Dr. Fiona Vernal of the University of Connecticut. She'll introduce more about what she does there, but what she did for us was help us to weave some statistical and anecdotal research about home in Manchester, specifically throughout this art exhibit, and it's been a great addition. We like to have programs with every exhibit. We did the Wit and Wisdom Poetry Club of Manchester, did a public poetry reading here. We did a memoir and monologue storytelling class. The students in that class, some of which are experienced storytellers, some of which are first timers, although I would advocate that everybody's an experienced storyteller. They're going to be reading their stories on the 24th of February here on site. A few of them will be online. Audience can be either or, and we're going to have a few musicians and dancer actually to help us with the interludes in between the stories. Linda's one of our storytellers. So thank you for being here. Thank you all who are at Zoom or watching this on YouTube. So that's what I wanted to say. This is a casual conversation in that nobody's really planning. Maybe you are based on your research, but we don't have PowerPoints. We don't have anything like that. We just want to talk about, you know, what home means and the impact of where we live on our opportunities and our lived experiences. I believe on Zoom, we also have someone from Manchester's Department of Economic Planning and Economic Development, as well as the Housing Authority. So hopefully we will hear their perspectives. So I'm just gonna share a paraphrase that I heard on NPR earlier this week. They said how there's no bigger predictor of your socioeconomic opportunity than the zip code in which you were born. And I found that to be really seems self-evident when somebody says it, but I grew up in Manchester and I have great positive memories of it. I went to public school, but now that I came back, however many years later, it's not important, to hear the other experiences of other people who grew up at the same time or different times in Manchester have a completely different frame of reference for the town and how welcoming and hospitable and you know, it might be. So I'm just interested to see where the conversation goes. And we're going to start with Dr. Vernal, then we're going to have Dr. Diane Kearney, who, did you grow up here?
I did.
Excellent. So you have a large frame of reference as well. And then we're going to talk to someone from Manchester, Manchester Association of Catholic Charities.
Manchester area.
Manchester area. So why don't you start first, actually? I'm going to throw you on the bus.
Okay.
So introduce yourself and what you do for the community.
Okay.
And I'm going to put my mask back on.
So do you mind if I take my mask down?
While you speak, that's absolutely fine.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Shannonvaldi. I am the Director of Services at MAC Charities, the Manchester Area Conference of Churches. We are a nonprofit organization that reaches out into the community to meet the unmet basic needs in our community. And what that means is we have a full service community kitchen that is open 6 days a week. And we serve lunch to anybody who is hungry and in need of a hot meal from 11:30 to 12:45, Monday through Saturday. On Sunday, we do partner with the Salvation Army in town to take that day. So that way there is no one in the town of Manchester that can go hungry or without a meal at least once a day, 7 days a week. We have an emergency food pantry where we assist all of Manchester and Bolton residents who are in need of food. It could be someone as a one-time need, or it could be someone on a weekly to monthly basis that needs the assistance. With the food, we also assist with further diapers and things like that. We have our community friends thrift store where we are open to the public, but we also work on a voucher system for individuals who may be in need, but do not have the financial means to get the clothing that they need. We can assist them with vouchers to act as sort of like a money monopoly system to be able to go in there and self-select clothes that they would want for themselves and then not be embarrassed when they get up to the cash register and it's just a voucher like a credit card handed over and the transaction's all taken care of. We have our emergency food pantry that is also open where we serve clients 5 days a week for shopping. We have our emergency outreach, community outreach and emergency service department, which oversees the umbrella of emergency services. Someone who's in need of emergency housing, if they're unsheltered homeless outside, if they are behind in arrears with their utility bills or their rent, they can contact us and we can go through what their emergency situation was to try to break the barrier or the financial barrier, and then we can assist if necessary.
So I guess one of the points starting there is that there is a lot of emergency need around home. And why is that? Like, why is there so much need? And I'm overwhelmed by all that you do and the way that you do it with such dignity for the people to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Why is there so much need in Manchester, Dr. Vernal? Because you researched our housing and our history. Do you want to talk about the background of your research project?
Yes, I'll do my. All right, I'm Dr. Fiona Vernal. I'm Associate Professor of History and Africana Studies. And one of my research interests, I have several, is housing inequality and looking at a history of housing in the greater Hartford region. And I was really pleased when the opportunity arose to share the initial housing exhibition that I designed with my undergraduate students at UConn. Went into the archives, conducted oral histories, and launched an exhibit that premiered first at the Hartford Public Library and premiered at the University of Connecticut. And when I was thinking about when you approached me to bring the exhibition here, it was evident that Manchester had a distinct story as a mill town, and although it fits into the broader patterns of inequality that we know about the greater Hartford region, it made sense to try to tell a specific story about Manchester. I think one of the ways that we can back into the question that you just asked me is even to just think about the moment that we are in now, and just how many people, just how the current housing market that we've been hearing about, how the current housing market is squeezing people out of housing and pushing them on the rental market, for example. And then landlords, a lot of them predatory, a lot of them in some of the same straits in terms of meeting their own expenses have the opportunity to push up the rents and to squeeze renters out of the market. And in the last 2 years of the pandemic, while there's been some relief for homeowners in terms of delaying their mortgage payments or sort of attaching it to the end of their mortgages, even the interventions to help renters has been really hard to come by. Some of the programs haven't even been administered properly, where the money is there, but the administrative services attached to it to get the money out of the door is really difficult. But the pandemic, the problems that people have been facing during the pandemic is part of a longer history of how renters are squeezed and how the lack of proper subsidies, the lack of proper housing supply does not meet the actual need on the ground. And Black women especially are at the highest risk. And if they have children, it's even worse for them. The kinds of people who are on the front lines or have been on the front lines during the pandemic, the folks who've lost their jobs, the folks who do not have an income, these are some of the renters who've been pushed out there on the market at the worst possible time. So between the tsunami of the pandemic, tsunami of the eviction crisis, these are some of the vulnerabilities that people are facing that's making it very, very difficult for people to meet their standards.
And Shannon, have you seen a big increase in your services over the last 2 years?
We've seen not only an increase of individuals asking for rent support because of the increase when their lease would be renewed. We're also seeing an increase in individuals asking for security deposits because they've unfortunately had to go through the eviction process and now they're trying to find somewhere, which at that point makes it even difficult because once you have an eviction on your record, a lot of landlords will not rent.
I mean, and in terms of the audience that is listening, right? Everybody, the folks who are in housing talk about the 3 S's, right? They talk about housing subsidies, housing stability, and housing supply. And right now in the market, they couldn't be in adverse relationship to each other. It's not all dire, so I will, I can talk about that a little bit later on, but I at least wanted to have an opportunity to introduce yourself as well.
Well, I really wanted to ask you a question. Just listen to you. I'm definitely fascinated and intrigued. I'm just curious though, does Manchester stand out? In terms of the problems? Is Manchester an anomaly or is the pattern the same throughout the state?
I wouldn't say Manchester is anomalous. The issue with places like Windsor, Bloomfield, Manchester, with suburbs is that we don't realize just how much some of the problems that we associate with bigger cities or with cities have crept into suburban landscapes, and just how much, like the zip codes that's associated with poverty are also suburban zip codes, and that people here are also facing a lot of vulnerabilities and issues, with transportation and employment and healthcare. So Manchester is not an outlier, but sometimes people don't necessarily realize that the problem of poverty, the problem of insecurity, the problem of housing instability and poor housing supply is also very noticeable.
Whose responsibility is that? So when you have a community like Bloomfield or Manchester, and you have such diverse experiences across the town, that some people have such insecurity and other people are completely unaware of it. I think we've all, during the pandemic, heard about them extending foreclosures and rent during the pandemic, like they weren't allowing people to get evicted. But beyond that, I've heard a lot, and a lot of detail about what's happening in Manchester.
Whose responsibilities? Well, I am very glad to be up here tonight to say it's everybody's responsibility, and the kind of exhibition that we have here can contribute to that a greater understanding of that problem. So in addition to, the folks who have come to this exhibit have had an opportunity to look at the demographic profile of Manchester and to see, yeah, there was a time when Manchester could barely attract 123 Black people, and it's, Manchester is 18% Black now, and I mean Black specifically, so I don't collapse everybody into an African American category, because that includes people of Caribbean ancestry as well. But the arts, the humanities has a lot to contribute to the general public even being able to be aware that there's a problem. Just right behind me, right, is Trade Books. Trade Works is just absolutely astounding look at housing insecurity and foreclosure and eviction and instability, and a lot of, and I think all of us are responsible. We have to educate, so we have to educate ourselves. We have to make ourselves aware of the problem, but it's also the Connecticut Department of Housing, it's Manchester's housing department. We have to match the resources to people who need it. We need better data for that. It's the developers. They need to build better and affordable housing to meet the need to meet the supply. It's everybody's responsibility, and that is not a cop-out, right? If it's everybody's responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility. But the responsibility certainly is not on the individual or the family shoulders who's experiencing housing security. It's not, if you look at it through a lens of individual responsibility, that's not going to get you very far. It's a systemic problem, and it requires a systemic solution. And these kinds of arts and cultural expression does play a really important part in helping to raise people's awareness about it.
I think what I could add to this too, though, and I guess I'm always the one who brings the bad news. But this
That wasn't great news.
well, I think in part, Manchester's story with regard to housing historically is not a great one. And I'm not saying that we haven't evolved as a people. I think Manchester is really trying to equalize a playing field for all of its residents. But the beginning wasn't good. I recall, and I grew up in Manchester, and my experience as a Black woman raised by a single Black Jamaican woman was very difficult and painstaking. I mean, people might ask me, why'd you come back? And we won't get into that, so I'll stick to the topic. But what I will say is that in 1981, the town of Manchester was sued by the Justice Department because they wanted to remain racially exclusive. And in terms of housing, the only housing that they built at that time between 1961 and even 1970, I think there were 264 units and 0 were people of color. I'm always going to bring sort of the race story into it because I believe that everything has to do with race. It plays a significant role. But what's telling is Manchester was only one of 10 towns in the entire country that was sued because of this, because they wouldn't take a grant, a block grant of $500,000 to increase housing or to provide affordable housing. And so here we are years later. It just makes me wonder if it was, if that was sort of the beginning, because Manchester was really proud of trying to be exclusive, even though they will say that that's not the reason. What they will say is because of they didn't know that they could bear it economically. And so they didn't want that responsibility. But I don't agree with that, just because, if that were the case too, then you wouldn't see those disparities in other areas. And even the Manchester employees at that time, I think out of 450 employees, I think 4 were people of color. So there's this trend. And I think that I just wonder if the trend continues.
The 1980s is not even the root of that, right? Like that, it even goes farther.
Absolutely.
Farther back to the 1940s as different areas of Manchester are open up for development.
Yeah.
And developers are embedding restrictive covenants into their deeds, sometimes unbeknownst to the homeowners. So even if you were, they didn't want certain kinds of people. They didn't want Jewish people. They didn't want African American people. So even if you could afford the down payment for a home, those kinds of instruments made it very easy for real estate agents to steer people into particular neighborhoods. And not everybody wants to be a pioneer, right? Not everybody wants to be at the forefront of like bearing the racism. Some of the early families who were here, people knocked over their mailboxes. People drove over their lawns, nested their lawns, and just harassed them to no end. And not everybody has that fortitude. And so they went and found other communities that would welcome them. So the roots go back much farther than the 1980s. The kind of people that Manchester thought would come if they built that affordable housing was poor people and people who would eventually end up on welfare and be a burden to the town. And we have to work really hard to remove the stigma around poverty, right? But Manchester has also come a long way. It now accepts those federal,
Right.
those
No,
federal
it has.
funds.
It's come a long way, but it does have a history. I mean, and the stigma still sticks, right? Which is that Clanchester piece, which again was around the 70s and the 80s again, all rooted from that HUD situation when they refused to do the right thing, as far as I'm concerned. And so there were a lot of cross burnings. There was all of that.
I know you said you're not going to get back into it, but you are here and I'm here and we're here. So what brought you back to Manchester?
Oh, God. That's funny, right? And I went to an HBCU, so you'd think that I would have stayed down there. I don't know, my mom was here by herself and I'm an only child. And so I wanted to come back to make sure that I could support my mother. And so I did come back to Manchester. I went into education, and based on my experience going to school at an HBCU, I finally began to really like myself because it was okay to talk about race. I think prior to that, I definitely had issues, wanted to fit in because this town really prided itself on being white and create that whiteness. And so to come back, I came back angry, but absolutely prepared to make sure that my students didn't experience what I experienced, regardless of the neighborhood that they lived in. But that was a struggle as well. It was very difficult. But, so I came back to really support my mother, who was my backbone. But it's not been easy. It's been a struggle. And again, I would say over the last, during 2009, I don't know, I guess you could Google it and you'll see. But my job was eliminated because I talked too much about race. I talked too much about equity, so they eliminated my position. So I would say that in the last 6 years, there's been a change. But please note, it's in the last 6 years, which isn't a very long time. You know what I mean? And I think that the town has stepped up to really be more inclusive, as well as the school district has stepped up. So I know I've said a lot there. You asked me one simple question.
So let's take this moment. Is there anyone on Zoom or anyone here who wants to speak to what we've spoken about already in terms of Manchester specifically? We're going to broaden the conversation more to home in general, but I know there's someone someone from the housing authority or someone from the town who just wants to share about what they've been working on and what they've been seeing in priorities.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Hi. Sorry I'm not on video. I'm just a disembodied voice. My name's Kyle Scheel. I'm in the planning department. Happy to meet with Dr. Vernal a couple of weeks ago, talk about her perspectives of home exhibit. I staff the Housing and Fair Rent Commission, and I work pretty closely with our community development block program manager. So I do have a pretty good handle on housing in Manchester. And I was interviewed on a PBS show a couple of months ago about some of the statewide legislation from Desegregate Connecticut and how Manchester compares with other more exclusive communities. And I did reference that Clanchester reference that Dr. Kearney mentioned. I did say the only reason that other communities weren't called Clanchester was because it didn't rhyme. You weren't going to refer to Glastonbury as Clanchester or whatever. But I could say I know for me, I take a lot of pride in working for Manchester because it is inclusive and diverse. And I know other communities in this region, they use their land use and zoning regulations really to exclude people. It's sort of facially race neutral. They're talking about, lot sizes and community character, et cetera, et cetera. They're not really clever code words in a lot of ways. And that's how a lot of communities have used their zoning regulations to keep people out, whether by income or by race. And I just know for me, working for those communities wouldn't really be aligned with my values and not really be a lot of fun. But I can say, at least as far as long as I've been here, there's been an effort to make it easier for people to build houses, develop more units at all market rates and affordable. And in terms of the comparison to the region, I would say we do quite well. Hartford probably has more. Vernon, believe it or not, has more affordable housing. But in terms of the region, I think Manchester is pretty far ahead of the game. But I'll stop there. But yeah, I'm happy
How
to
long have
listen
you
to
worked for
you
the town, Kyle?
guys. 2013.
So about eight years. So in that
9 years this March. Yep.
Okay, great.
You guys going to explain what the Fair Rent Commission is?
You
what
can
it
ask
does?
him.
Can you explain what the Fair Rent Commission is and what your role is? Because I think most people don't even know about it. And maybe you can explain just in a Reader's Digest way what the Fair Rent Commission is and what you do.
Sure. It's a combined commission, the Housing and Fair Rent Commission. So the housing piece of it is we meet twice a year, and it's really, we sort of go over housing news, policy. I see Joe Diascoli is here. He's an ex-officio member from the Housing Authority. We basically just talk about housing issues and keep the members abreast on trends, and occasionally they'll speak out in the advocacy and speak out on policy. The fair rent component piece, there's a piece in the town ordinance that states that residents have a right to complain if they feel their rent has been raised unduly or unfairly, and there's a process. I can tell you it doesn't have a whole lot of teeth to it, but there is a process. They can go to the town attorney, and the town attorney can sort of act as a mediator, talk to the landlord, see if their rent increase was actually, fair or justifiable or not. And like I said, not a whole lot of teeth, but that's a way for a formal town official can step in and possibly mediate. In the 9 years that I've been on staffing that committee, I think we've really only had one that made it to his staff, and he resolved it on his own. So it never rose to the level of an official complaint, but that's the function of the Fair Rent Commission.
Thank you. Joseph, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Joseph Diascoli. I'm the Executive Director with the Manchester Housing Authority. I've been the Executive Director, it'll be 8 years this coming May 1st. And basically the Manchester Housing Authority, we roughly have 317 public housing units, which is breaking down between federal and state properties. So We house the elderly and disabled. We do have scattered sites. We do have 21 duplexes throughout Manchester, which is our family units. We also have a congregate facility that has 37 individuals. So if you're not familiarized with congregate, it's basically for the elderly that's frail, and it's one step before you go into assisted living. One of the things, since I've been the executive director a couple of years ago, we finally start up a nonprofit, in which hopefully with our nonprofit, we will start, I'm gonna start having meetings with the town to hopefully start building some affordable housing units in the town of Manchester. We also are looking to become a developer. The Housing Authority has an application through HUD under a program that's called the Rental Assistance Demonstration. And if that does go through, then we can become a private developer throughout the town of Manchester. So we can partner up with the town, partner up with other individuals, use tax credits. But right now, with housing authorities, you're under statutes of HUD and their regulations. Once we can get out of that, we become a developer. So it's very intriguing and very exciting. I have a lot of support with my board of commissioners in regards to this. So we're near the final line, we hope, with some snags, but Kyle had mentioned that I am an ex officio with the town, that we meet twice a year in regards to housing issues. But the Housing Authority has a great partnership with the town, and we're hoping that will exceed in the near future.
Great, thank you. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think that the town being in charge of their own system of building and administering the housing and the regulations, do you think that that would be more inclusive than HUD? Or less? I mean,
Well, yeah, so the Housing Authority is a separate entity, so we're not part of the town administration. Basically, we get federal funds for our operating and subsidies for the individuals that we serve. And, you get capital funds and everything else. And a lot of times, if there's something that you need to do right now with the Housing Authority, you can't add or develop any additional units because of the rules and regulations that pertain. If with this new program that HUD has put out, in which I kind of basically say it's rad, but it's like read a lot of documents. There's a lot of documents behind the scenes. You're still assisting the individuals, but the funding is going to be different. You got less stringent rules and regulations that you follow, and you become a developer. So if there, I have some visions that I have talked with my commissioners, and visions that my commissioners have. And, we can partner up and start developing other units, for the individuals. There are a lot of people that, are getting older, and they're going to be needing units, affordable units. And, where can you find a 1-bedroom unit at $425 or $460? When you look at affordable definition, that's way below affordable, but the prices are very convenient, and it is affordable for the elderly and disabled that are on a very small fixed income. So hopefully with our visions that we'll be able to expand and become a developer and like I said, partner up with the town on other deals per se. You could probably do some mixed family units. There's a lot of visions that you could possibly do as long as it's developed the correct way.
Great, thank you. So in addition to the actual homes, the residencies, in your research, what are we talking about when you think of home? Because there's neighborhoods, there's communities, there's parks, there's education, there's transportation. All of these impact our day-to-day lives in ways that those of us who've never had to struggle for things that other people take for granted maybe don't understand. What have you found, Dr. Vernal?
Probably that my favorites, I shouldn't say that, right? I shouldn't say what my favorite stories, but one of my favorite stories is of Fiona Vernal, right? And she tells a story in her oral histories are a part of my research process. I find it really generative to sort of give people a space to tell their own story and sort of help them curate which piece of it to highlight in the exhibition, right? And hers is a story that discusses her life history, the Dominican Republic, and then transplanting to New York, and then sort of doing a reconnaissance in Connecticut because she has friends here in Wethersfield, and then eventually coming to Manchester and falling in love, right? Falling in love with Manchester and falling in love with two different houses. And so for her, the story of Manchester, she tells it in relation to coming from New York, right? And the opportunity to have like a really nice porch, the opportunity to be across the street from the park, to have her, to be able to, for her kids to walk to school, to bring her mother here because she'd always dreamed of having a big porch compared to New York. And I think when you think about home, there isn't going to be one experience, right? Your related stories about trauma in Manchester. Boyda has related stories that's about how Manchester compares to New York. I'm also a transplant from Jamaica to New Jersey to Michigan and to Manchester, and my welcome to Manchester was through somebody I had interviewed when I was 21 for a different oral history project, who said, if you ever come back to the region for Michigan, Manchester might be the place for you. And so whenever I thought of Manchester, I attached myself to that gentleman who also had dreams, very different kinds of dreams about Manchester. He said when he came to the United States in the 1970s, this was one of the places where he could find homes at the price point that worked for him. I'm not exactly sure what that price point was because he was a student, but he found a home. He purchased a home. He had it until about 10 years ago. He tried to sell it to me as well. I told him
to buy it.
I did not. It's a multi-family property. I told him I have no dreams of being anybody's landlord. But he eventually bought multiple properties in Manchester. And although he did recount that Manchester colloquially being known as Manchester, he also talked about standing firm and standing your ground. So he is one of those people who wants to pioneer and who says, no, I'm going to stand firm and I'm going to defend my right as a Black person to own a home, and nobody is going to chase me out of here. Now, when he talks about Manchester, he talks about owning a bunch of property, and that's sort of helping him support his lifestyle. My introduction to Manchester also came when I finally moved from Michigan. I thought of him, and that's what brought me to Manchester. I thought, well, he's going to help support me here in Manchester and integrate me into the town. And when I finally settled into my apartment, my neighbor showed up with apples and invited us apple picking, and my little boys found out that there were other little boys down the street, and that was the end of that. We weren't going to live anywhere else. So a home is so capacious. It means so many different things.
And Manchester has been so many.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons this show is called Perspectives. It's the third of an annual series we started 3 years ago. And initially we had an exhibit called Perspectives, We Are All Different, We Are All One. And that was intended to be our equity, inclusion, diversity show, when it was rightfully pointed out to me that every show should be seen through the lens of equity, inclusion, and diversity. So we decided to continue with the perspectives theme just because the idea of looking at one subject from different perspectives is what we should all be doing. And I was trained as a life coach. And one of the biggest lessons I ever learned is that we all have so many judgments about other people, about each other, more ourselves, more so now than we did then. And if you can replace judgment with curiosity and realize that, you know, ask the question, oh, I wonder why they think different. Again, I grew up in Manchester. You know, I went to college and then went off to Los Angeles. And it wasn't until I came back and worked on staff that I even ever heard of the term Manchester. And I went to school with people of color, but it wasn't, it just wasn't an issue for me because I didn't see them as anything other than just classmates. I think I didn't hang out with a large group of people. Black people, because they didn't tend to be in the theater department, which is where I was at the time. But it's just very interesting to just put out a call for artists and say perspectives of home and getting abstract paintings, getting portraits, getting pictures. I took photographs of my home, which you could say are somewhat idealized. They're just pretty pictures of the house I grew up in, which coincidentally Loida, who she was speaking about, is living in now. I don't know, Trey. Trey, you're here. Do you want to say a piece about, you know, something about your piece and when this call for perspectives of home, did this idea come to you immediately, or did you know what you wanted to represent?
Sure, yeah. So that piece, do you want to, I was going to say, do you want me to get?
Yeah, if you want to come over here because
Just so
I have
that
the
I'm not
microphone
like
for
screaming
you.
into like the mic or whatever. But yeah, so this piece in particular, it was sort of a reference to,
might as well sit here, Trey.
are you sure?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Oh, listen. I'm actually gonna dim the lights a little. We might be able to see your piece better.
Hello. So that piece was in reference to a similar one that I did years ago, where it was along the same lines of like my experience going through like foreclosure, like my family's experience going through foreclosure, and just like sort of like all the charged and like emotional turmoil that kind of went about, like just going through like the whole process of being evicted and having like 60 days to like kind of round up your stuff and try to find like a new place to live. And so, and at the time I was commuting, like I was going to college and I was kind of dealing with that plus like, you know, just like college life, because I also went to University of Hartford Art School. So I kind of made a piece like this in reference to that, where it was like kind of just me going through that whole process and like that whole trying to like, I guess just trying to like process it and just deal with like what was happening at the time. So then when Workspace had to call out for this, like I kind of approached it in a sort of similar vein, but just like kind of just taking like whatever I had left of, because at the time I like can only afford to like carry so many things with me. So like, funny enough, I had my old bed frame that just for whatever reason I just decided to carry with me. So just thinking that, oh, when I go to a new place, I'll be able to just get a new mattress and I already have the bed frame set up. So that has always, so funny enough, that has always I kind of carried that with me, and like the idea of just carrying that plus all the memories of growing up in this particular house and like with family and stuff, and then just having it all kind of stripped away and just and only being left behind with like certain remnants of that. So that's like that's essentially what inspired me to sort of set up this installation.
Now, how old were you when you went through that experience?
it's funny enough, it was a few years ago, like 3-4 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So it was like 20, so because I'm 26 now, so it was like 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was you personally, not your family, not your mom.
Yeah, it was all of us, like kind of go, yeah, it was just like going through that process, yeah.
It's a beautiful piece. What got me was the bed frame. I looked at it earlier and I was like, I got on to ask like what it means. But thank you for explaining it.
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, I've been to, my children volunteered at charities and we served a meal and I really, I was really touched by the environment, right? Like it's just sitting down and having a warm meal and being served a meal and being treated like a human being. I think you guys did a really good job of making people feel at home. And I think we have to remember when people are experiencing foreclosure and eviction and when children are feeling uprooted, it can be a really dehumanizing process, and people blame, so the people who are the victims end up getting blamed for their own problems. In fact, it's really hard to see past that in treatment.
It also creates like an insecurity too, where it's like people are unwilling to talk about their experience just because we have the tendency to like what you just said, like attach sort of these negative connotations, and generally speaking, like you sort of have like you have a tendency to shame the homeless too, whether we do it consciously or not, or directly. It's like that's just a prevailing attitude that kind of has been is just always prevalent. So I think and that was part of the reason why I wanted to showcase this, was just to kind of open up that dialogue and also just have people feel whether they experience that, to like sort of talk about it, and then hopefully kind of maybe find some sort of resolution to it, whether it's speaking about it or actually sharing information.
Yeah, I found that in being at lunch. So to touch base, we have an open invitation that anybody can just come in and sit at a table. And it's welcoming, it's opening conversation with individuals that do not know one another, because a lot of times that is their social cue of time to have conversation. And I found one of the realest ways of meeting the individuals that we do work with that are experiencing these crises is to be very real with them. Do not pretend like you know what they're going through. Do not try to say, I understand what you're going through, because in that moment you may not. And we found that to get individuals to open us, to talk to us about what's really going on, it's really just sitting back and listening. I think that we forget to listen to people a lot nowadays. So we're all wrapped up in our own, we want to do this, we want to change this, but we're not actually listening to what other people, what their real needs are and what their real wants are. And I've learned that when we sat back to actually listen, it makes a world of difference.
Linda, do you want to say anything? Linda's participated in the 5-week memoir and monologue class, which was part of this exhibit. And in fact, back here, we're going to be having an evening of storytelling in 2 weeks on the 24th. That's 2 weeks, right? And it's an evening of story and song. And I mentioned earlier, and it's free. It's going to be like this, where the storytellers are going to be here on site with some audience members. We'll also be on Zoom. But it's a unique experience. Do you want to say what you expected in the class or what you came out of it with?
Sure, I'll speak briefly to that. And if I may speak honestly, when I initially entered the class on Zoom, I expected it to be all white people. And in my mind, I didn't know that until I entered the class, and I was pleasantly surprised to see the diversity within that class. That it was about 20 people, the diversity in race, ethnicity, and age. And so I admit my own socialization bias that I had. And so that was something right off the bat that I reflected on it and it just surprised me. And I was grateful to experience a writing class with such a diverse group.
Well, I have to tell you that was intentional. Initially, when I offered the class and we shared to our community and on Facebook, and we have a diverse community of artists, they weren't all middle-aged, but I'll say 5 middle-aged white women signed up, some a little younger. And I'm like, this is gonna be a problem. So I luckily I was able to get a grant for this class, and I was able to pay somebody to take the time and have the knowledge to proactively engage and recruit people. So they were willing, but they weren't gonna see a Facebook post and sign up for the class. So they were engaged and enrolled. And I think when you're doing diversity, I think one of the excuses is, well, it was out there, they could have applied. There's resources for them. And I know that the town is trying to rally resources. We're trying to support entrepreneurs here. We haven't been incredibly effective at getting a huge diversity of entrepreneurs because I personally don't know where to reach them. So you have to engage somebody proactively, take the time, take the money to go find them because we're starting in an unfair playing field. So thank you for acknowledging that. And it's been amazing.
I was just gonna say, I would just
about
add-
the listening, because I know that you are particularly blown away by people's stories.
Yeah, and I was grateful to have our classroom writers trust each other with our stories, and not from class one, but we developed it, from class one, and so that was something that certainly broadened my experience, and I hope it was the same for others. And it was also having grown up here in Manchester, it did allow me the opportunity to delve into some of my own early experiences, and I'm looking forward to telling that story now.
Thank you. Tim, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Manchester. We didn't know it, but I think we were all pretty poor at the time. Only had one car, and my dad started with, got back from the war. He had a little rent on Waddell Road and half of a 2-family, and then he saved up some money working at Pratt Whitney and bought the single family at 9 Waddell Road. And then I guess when I came along, by the time I was 2, the little house was too small. So we bought the 4-room Cape up on Center Street. The second floor was unfinished. That's kind of how they sold them back in the day. And to find out, everybody's house in the neighborhood had the same skeleton key. Everybody kept it under the mat. Nobody will find it. And we walked, all of us walked the Burke plank starting in kindergarten. I was age 4, started walking. And I, went off to college, wound up coming back, got married, and, same thing, bought a small house, and then saved up, bought a bigger house when we had a second child. And I was a new homeowner when that lawsuit you mentioned came about, and I have a different perspective on it, and I actually did quite a bit of study on that. There's luckily the Manchester Herald is now online thanks to the Historical Society, so you can go to any date and you can actually read the court decision for yourself. Just so everybody doesn't think Manchester was just a horrible place. The case was decided in favor of the town of Manchester, and the case was never appealed. And the judge who decided the case was known as a very liberal judge, but I think it came down to they didn't present enough evidence to prove their case. The judge it were actually 2 legal aid attorneys are the ones who initiated the case, and the Justice Department joined on. But and to Manchester's credit, a few years later, they got back into the voluntary program that they decided they didn't want to be part of, and we still get around 500,000.
Still 500,000?
Well, yes. Unfortunately, I think it's in that range. It could be higher. I don't know, but they use that, and they slice it and dice it. And I know the housing authority, which I'm the commissioner on, Joe, gets get small parcels of that to, like we did, like new doors and things like that for the housing units on Brookfield Drive. So, I thought it was great. I just loved growing up here. We had, at the time, Irvine had a pool. We spent the whole summer at the pool or playing pickup baseball or softball.
And can I ask, was the population at the pool diverse?
But it was not. You're absolutely right. Manchester is not diverse, and it is now. But it was not. It's, it was deficiency. I don't know if, it just evolved. I don't know if it was deliberate. I mean, homes were pretty reasonable here, but.
Well, I think it's the meetings that I've been in. I think it's deliberate now. The intention is deliberate, but again, it takes work to proactively try to even, the playing field. I was at some conference once, and they, you're sitting in the front row, and they give you a ball of paper rolled up in a ball, and they're like, throw it in the can in the front. People in the front row did, and then they had people in the back row and said, throw it in the can. Well, they're at a disadvantage because they're in the back row. You can't say everybody had the same challenge. So I think, that's part of the problem, is that if you want to improve things for the people in the back row, you can't just say throw harder. But again, as a staff person here, I've been on staff for 4 years only. I like what I see, and we've had some diversity training, and you can tell the people who are uncomfortable, and then you can tell the people who are really resentful for having to be there. But there's more people who are willing. So, but
Can I follow up on where you started us off with these zip code estimates? And because if you take a scenario of somebody who has the opportunity to purchase a house in the 1940s and the 1950s, whether then or now, a house is probably going to be the most valuable thing that a family owns. And there are multiple generations of people who have been shut out and steered out of that market, even when they could afford it. And people who are shut out of the market who cannot afford it. And those families didn't get to build generational wealth. They didn't get to buy a small cape and then scale up, when the family got bigger, and then sell that and put the proceeds into a bigger house. They stayed renters. They didn't get to write off their mortgage interest. And so it's not just about whether it was, for lots of people who got to go about their business in Manchester, say Manchester was really nice, or that wasn't their experience. I applaud that. I'm glad that you had that experience, but that's a privilege that a lot of people were deliberately and systematically prevented from taking advantage of. And it's still happening now. Black home ownership rates are tanking, and they're even, with the subprime crisis in 2008, people have barely began to recover from that. And then here we are, about 12 years later, with the pandemic, and the opportunities for young Black people of color are tied to their zip codes, because opportunities in this country are tied to housing and property taxes. And if you live in places where your property value is not going up and up because people think if Black people move in the neighborhood or Latino people move in the neighborhood, your property value is going to go down, what's the tax base going to look like? education, right? And so it's just this thing that repeats itself generation after generation, and it's going to take a long time for us to dig out of that legacy, even as Manchester has certainly improved, even as Manchester is being deliberate about that across the United States. This is still the picture, and we have to ask ourselves, why is the American dream tied up with housing? Does it have to be tied up with housing? Why is education tied to property taxes? Should money follow the kid? The Chef versus O'Neill case was just finally signed by the governor.
In which case is that?
On housing desegregation in Greater Hartford, right? But a significant piece of it is, are we still going to have to go begging to suburban towns to let our Black and Latino kids in? Right, like that piece is not really that enforceable. Everyone is celebrating, and I'm really glad it's been signed. But the way that we've tied housing to educational opportunities is unjust, and that's why NPR make that statement that our zip codes kind of predict opportunity zones. They predict educational opportunities, and just because we have folks like me who got to go to college and get a PhD, it doesn't explain all the other people who didn't have, didn't have and don't have, still don't have those opportunities.
Is there anybody who has anything to comment on at this juncture?
Are you a professor of history?
I'm a professor at UConn, yes.
And history in general?
And history is my field, yes.
Oh,
And you're also associated with the EPOCH Center. Do you want to say something about that?
Yes, so I've been at UConn since 2005. I still occasionally get mixed up as a student. The little gray hairs are coming in, so I'll take it as long as it continues.
Just got the spray. Not that I do that.
And UConn's given me a platform to do my oral histories and to think about ways of bringing community voices into the work that I do. And so 2 years ago, I formalized some of the work that I had already been doing under engaged public oral and community histories. And that means I can partner with organizations to bring oral histories into the mix as a way to get people to participate. One of the things that I've learned is that if you make the story about somebody, like everybody's an expert in their own life story, right? No matter what historical context you can provide, everybody is an expert in what's happened in their own lives and like the emotions that they bring to it. And you can't get any closer to authenticity than that. So I have been able to use EPOCH as a way to collaborate on a host of, whether that's panel discussions, or exhibitions, or documentation projects, or we're helping people with their archives, and it's been a really wonderful platform. And this exhibit, right, is a part of that kind of work.
Well, we're so honored that you helped us put this together. I think it's a really unique exhibit. We're also partnering with historychip.com. And they've been around for a couple of years, but they are a global database of stories. And their theory is that, the stories written from the winner's point of view and the top of the hierarchy. And to get to authenticity, we need to collect everybody's stories. So they just have an open platform. It's similar to StoryCorps in that we're trying to get people to tell and listen to stories, but they're not curated. Like you write your own story. You can submit it in writing. You can submit it on video, audio, and then their technology is able to keyword everything so that when you want to find out a story related to some experience you have, you can type those keywords in. We're going to try to collect as many Manchester stories as possible. in advance of our bicentennial celebration next year. Maybe we'll have story booths set up here and other places that make it really easy for people to come and do it. Maybe we'll do more storytelling classes so people feel more comfortable publicly sharing their stories. But anybody can sign up now, historychip.com. It's free to share your stories. So we'll be telling more information about that as we go on.
I'd like to share that. I remember I came to this country when I was probably 10 or 11. And then we moved from Hartford to Manchester when I was 8th grade. So I've been here pretty much ever since then. Of course, I'm only 25. So yeah, that was just a few years ago. But anyway, and I lived on Hartford Road in those apartments. They're now condominiums. I don't know what they're called. But right near Dairy Queen, there were some apartments. And I remember that the experience there were other kids there. So the experience there was very positive to me. My trauma or the racial trauma that I experienced really wasn't linked to housing. It was linked to connections I made in public. So in school or, you know, any other public arena, but not specifically to housing. But anyway, so I was there though until I graduated from college. Actually, my mother lived there. But I wasn't able to sort of get into the idea of buying a house until I was probably, I want to say my late 30s, early 40s. So, because my mother didn't have anything, right? And so it wasn't until she did everything she could to make sure that I went to college. And if you know anything about a strong Jamaican Black woman, she says, I remember calling her one day and saying, "Ma, I can't do this." In college, she said, "What?"
Yeah.
You know, she basically gets off of this phone, like, you know, basically told me, "You're going to finish." And I did, you know, obviously. But anyway, when I came back, I still couldn't afford to buy a house, even though I had a degree. I got a master's degree. I still couldn't afford to get a house. And then finally, my cousins, like I said, I'm an only child, but my mother raised two of my cousins. So they helped me. And my mom still couldn't really help me. But it wasn't until, I want to say, my early 40s that I was able to tap into the housing market. And even then, it was a struggle living check to check with a degree, with a master's degree. And then obviously years later, I got my doctorate degree, but still. So now I live up in the Kearney area, but here I am now in my early 60s. And it's now that I can think about maybe buying a second property, but I'm getting ready to retire, you know, but I want my children to have generational wealth, but I'm late in the game. And I think that it's so unfair. And so all of those things build resentment, you know, I mean, you know, because I'm like, why that happened to me? That's not fair, you know, whereas other people, their parents gave them the down payment. And I'm generalizing, I'm not saying it was for everyone, but they still had an opportunity because they're not necessarily going to get they're going to get a better loan perhaps, or they're not looking at who I am, you know, so, and even I'm thinking about, again, buying another house. And then I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going to sell my house and I have a lot of Black art, I got to take all that art down, you know, to sort of maximize what I can get for that, because I think that's going to impact, which impacts again on the whole generational wealth, because I want my kids to have what everybody else has, you know, so it becomes, you know, a pandemic of itself.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
exhausting.
It's exhausting.
It's
yeah.
absolutely and completely exhausting to think about putting your house on the market and you have to remove the pieces of yourself because your house might fetch a lower price because they see that it's a Black person's house, right? It's absolutely exhausting. I think the everyday forms of racism that we experience, it's not only traumatic, it's mentally and emotionally exhausting.
Oh yeah.
And you have to check yourself and make sure that you're also safe. And that is exhausting. I have 3 I have 3 children and 2 very tall Black men. They tower over me. They're over 6'2". And I deliberately delayed my son getting a license because I figured as long as I was driving, the probability of him having an encounter with a police officer was going to be low. And so he's going to be 22 and he just got his license because he's a right fighter. And he's always like, I always think he's gonna be a lawyer. It's always sort of like his point of view and why. And I thought, but if you do that with a police officer, you're just gonna make him angry. And it's exhausting as a mom. And he goes to work and I'm wondering, okay, can you just drive on the road? Don't take that. I don't want you to get pulled over. He goes to visit his friends and I don't want to give him a curfew, but I'm thinking, you're a Black guy, maybe you should be on the road at 2 o'clock in the morning, just be home. It's exhausting. And I think that's what a lot of people don't get sometimes. Like, it would be nice to have something as a mother of 2 Black men.
Well, yeah, because I think at the end of the day, we want what everyone else has, you know?
And I think it sounds like there's just a sense of feeling home in the world that some of us take for granted. And that some people are just constantly made to feel to be an outsider. And I think that happens for individuals in their own little family and their own little community. That's their experience. But speaking of bigger collectives and the collective trauma and the collective unconscious, which is part of the Jungian psychology that I studied in my doctoral program. And it's mind-blowing. And I think when people don't expand their perspective to have that kind of empathy or curiosity, that what is other people's experiences.
I would add to, I grew up in Manchester. I was born and raised in Manchester. And I can tell you that I have 7 lovely memories of what home is to me. Because I didn't have, my parents worked paycheck to paycheck. Or there were times where my father was not present. And, it was all on my mom to take care of me and my 2 siblings. So I, growing up, didn't know that I even had an opportunity as a white woman to be able to buy a house. Because I watched my parents struggle day after day to try to just put food on the table for us. And I grew up in Manchester in the 90s, in the early 2000s, where diversity was becoming the norm. Like I had friends of color at school. I had friends that would, and so to me, I guess it wasn't until high school that I actually experienced like my first, oh, that doesn't sound right. Like, well, why are they being treated differently than me? So I guess it lost me for some time that I never looked at myself any differently than the people that I was living next door to, because we were all struggling through the same thing. And now that I am a mother and I'm married, we bought our first house 3 years ago, and I never knew that I could, but the reason why is because I had that statement made in a testimony that I gave. That I don't think I would be able to ever buy a house. And somebody pulled me to the side after we had this conversation. They were like, of course you can. You can do whatever you want to do. You just have to fight for it. You have to work for it. And I was never taught this is what you do. This is how you live. This is how you get the things you want in life. Because my parents were never privy to that information. So of course they never taught it down to me. So for me, I felt like I was like almost a first generation within my own family home to try to make better for my family.
Well, I'm finally looking for a house. I do not like moving. I mean, I moved like all other college students moved, but it was always traumatic for me. I did not like to move. And so I ended up in one of the old Cheney homes, and I just thought, I'm never living there. But at some point, I thought, yeah, I need to, my kids are growing up. I need to buy a house, and now it pains me the thought of leaving Manchester because I actually don't want to leave Manchester. So I'm looking around and I thought, oh, this was the worst year. So So I'm looking around and I said, okay, I'm not leaving Manchester. It's just like Loida that I interviewed, the house in Manchester is just going to come to me because Loida vowed never to leave her house. And then she found this other house. She said it just spoke to me. You know, it's like her house. And when she saw it, she knew it was gonna be her. So I thought, well, I'm gonna have the Loida experience in Manchester. I'm just gonna
That's
be
right.
When you find it,
driving
when
on
you
Highland
find it, you'll
Street
know. You'll know
and
it's the right
Illy's
one.
called to me.
We looked everywhere outside of Manchester because I was like, I grew up Manchester. I don't want my kids, we're gonna move out, we're gonna find somewhere different. And we bought a house in Manchester because it calls to you.
I think that's, absolutely.
Okay, I'll tell you, well, I grew up in New York City. And I ended up here because of a guy who I thought I wanted to marry, and he was getting his master's at UConn. And that didn't last, but here I am from 1985 till now. And but in any case, I grew up with diversity. And when I came here, all of New England, I found very strange in its lack of diversity. As well, I was very lonely before I got married, and then after I was divorced, even though I eventually knew a lot of people, but people don't get together. And they're very insular. And families, like I live in Scotland, which has zoning where you can't, it's like minimum of 2 acres for a family unit. Like you can't have anybody any less than 2 acres. And I'm on 4, and I actually really love that because I'm a gardener. I went to college in upstate New York for animal husbandry, ended up being a nurse, but still, in any case, oh gosh. So the fact that it's a farming town is a really big thing. And so to me, I really don't feel that, I don't feel that the reason for zoning is to keep whatever you consider riffraff out. And there's nobody super rich, and there's no really big houses or really mansions in Scotland. And everybody is reasonably, just some of us like, just making it. But I feel a big thing that I wanted to talk about is community. And because to me, that's what makes a home a home. And now I'm pretty isolated. I have MS, and I had a lot of community when I was married. I had one daughter, and when she was in the school system, that was my big community. And then my husband had a lot of siblings and he grew up in Scotland. But I find that people stay in Connecticut. I've seen more people that stay in where they've born here, like in my community, and a lot of my friends, they have grandkids, and all the generations have never left Connecticut. So it's kind of when you're divorced, it's kind of a lonely place, especially around holidays, especially, now I had to leave my job, and I'm taking care of 4 acres and I'm in my happy place when I'm dirty and seriously, and but I'm making it, and I have my good and bad days. But I was blessed. My parents, grandparents, and great grandparents all was in Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up Jewish, and I never was targeted for being Jewish. I had never heard Jewish slurs until I moved to Connecticut. And I had to tell people who were really good friends or with neighbors, like, I don't appreciate that joke. You know I'm Jewish. And in any case, so I have two uncles who went to Pratt Institute, and they were the first in the family to actually get college degrees. And they both are architects. And one I used to after school I would walk or use my subway pass and go to his office and be a little bit of a gopher, make a little money, and he won an award for a project he developed in the city for low income housing, which incorporated, and I hope that this is a good analogy for like creating community through architecture, is all those with young children were they were 2-level units, and and they were separated. They weren't all connected. There were spaces, there were parks for children, and then all built into it. And so anybody who had children had to be on the ground floor, which safer for your kids. They're not going to be jumping out the window. Not so noisy, for the people downstairs with kids running upstairs. And so it had all these features of that nature. And I don't think it ever got built, but it got featured in an architectural diagram. Right, I know.
Great concept.
It was written up, and he got a very prestigious awarded, and it was all written up in this architecture named Architecture Digest. And the other one works in Oakland, and he related to me that, and there's a lot of places in Oakland that are pretty rough, and there are people who go into these rough areas and pick up great properties for cheap, but how to make the people who are going to rent those places and feel that they're home enough to care about how they look, about taking good care of the property and not trashing things in the neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. And like one of his things was that he always put bird feeders on every property, and gardens, and so it was more than just painting stuff. It was and being in a place that has really no community right now, because you can't walk Route 14 without, especially me.
Yeah.
And the windy roads and barely any shoulder, and there's really nowhere to go. I had to take my daughter everywhere. She could never walk or ride her bike. I'd have to take her somewhere where it was bike rideable. And so community is part of development. And that, I believe, ties into, I guess this ties into this conversation, other than home, but also if our housing officials are still on the call, maybe that's something that could be embraced as an idea for Manchester. When
Yeah,
Can I just say?
Yes.
So this is, I was sitting here like cringing as you were talking, so I'm just like, oh, I wish I had my recorder.
Storyteller.
You do have a recorder.
Screen recording, my own recorder. But this would be a great thing for you to record on History Check,
Well,
right?
I want to tell you something just quickly. I'm going to interject. Is what brought me here to begin with was I saw the song and story thing that you're presenting after the people who attended the workshop. I was on Eventbrite getting some bread box music tickets, and I saw this free stuff, and I've been rather isolated this winter and not going down a good path. And I've been trying to get myself out there. And again, I don't like driving late at night because I feel like a victim because I can't run anymore, and working on getting an assist dog so that I can take everywhere with me. However, yeah, so I saw the story thing and I said, I am going to that, and I'm signing up for all these things because they're free and because they're gonna get me out of the house and they're gonna get me interacting outside of my own thing, and I'm gonna meet new people, and it's going to it's gonna like stimulate my intellect, my brain, which has gotten too lazy. And I'm also an artist, and I do write a lot in my head.
Right.
I do a lot of creative writing, and I write a lot while I'm stacking wood, and I always say, when I get in the house, I should write that down, but I never do.
Well, I'm gonna interrupt because we're coming to the
okay,
end of our program, but I have to say, I'm so thrilled that you're here. And I think the way we look at community often is, you know, when you're born, you have a neighborhood and you go to school and then you go to college and you're all living in the same place, having mostly the same experiences comparably. Then you get older, and if you have kids, then that's now your community is the school and everything, because we think that's what community is, people that we are alike with. But I think if we were more open, we'd realize the diversity of our storytelling class and how interesting it was to hear each other's stories and to contribute, and to, older people sharing their stories and the younger people being interested and younger people being given advice. I had a storytelling class where I had a recovering drug addict, ex-convict, tattooed all the way up here to his neck, who was exchanging stories with these 88-year-old women talking about their first romances. And it was beautiful. So I think if we expand our eyes, and obviously you connect with such a diverse group of people that come, and benefit from you, and that you can have honest connections and relationships and build community. So that's what we're trying to do here at Workspace with our artists. And again, the artists are alike because they're artists, so that's what brings them together. But other than that, it's so diverse. And we're trying to do that in the business world. Is that how you innovate and get great businesses and startups? Is different people sharing different ideas based on their different experience. And I think if we can embrace that, and you then maybe go home to our 4 acres and have a little solitude. That we all need.
I would like to open my home. And
Congratulations to you for getting out of the house and coming somewhere where you didn't know. And we're so glad we attracted you. We want to thank Kyle and Joseph, because we know you guys have so many meetings to attend. So to add this to your schedule was great. And Shannon for the work that you do, and Dr. Diane Kearney, whose pictures on the side of one of the buildings in Manchester for the positive impact she's had in her town, and Dr. Vernal and EPOCH the work that you're doing. So hopefully we can have more of these conversations, and record stories at History Chip, and see where that takes us. But yes,
Can I just say?
you can bring it home.
Not so much to bring it home, but just to say that I applaud what you're doing, and then you just have to keep looking for that, community in Manchester. There's music, there's art. My kids and I are eating out all of the little restaurants around here. The Angry Egg, we've decided to just go brunching. With all the Cosmic Omelet, just to get out and kind of see the place. So they're kind of mosey on over from Scotland into.
I'll be here
Manchester.
this Saturday for.
Oh, excellent, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So, so this is how, today is February 10th, 2022.